welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you have made the connection and are with us today. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us in ways that get us thinking, get us connected, and perhaps inspired or challenged to do just a bit more because we've made that connection. March is Women's History Month, and often the story of women has been one of silence and bias. March provides a dedicated time for us to revise those narratives, and they've been largely ignored, our women's contributions. In 2026, the observance is focused on how women are designing solutions with the theme, Leading the Change. Today, I have 3 women leaders joining me to discuss their leadership journey and ways each are ensuring knowledge and leadership skills are passed to the next big wave of change makers. And we have what I call President's Row, the past president, current president, and president-elect of the Public Relations Society of America, Minnesota. And that's PRSA. These are strong and brilliant women I am looking forward to you getting to know. Some background on Minnesota PRSA. This association is leading the way in strengthening public relations profession across Minnesota. It's a premier network for communication professionals, delivering dynamic programming, embedding diversity and inclusion into everything they do, and nurturing the next generation of PR leaders. Now, my guests include Greta Lorenz, who is the current president of PRSA Minnesota. She's an integrated communications and public relations agency leader. She's an accomplished strategic communications leader and trusted PR counselor to household brands across food, beverage, wellness, and retail industries. She brings a blend of creative vision, analytical thinking, and operational excellence to every engagement, guiding purpose-driven brand strategies to connect cultural insight with measurable business outcomes. Her career leadership has been at agencies, as well as serving in volunteer roles at Take Flight and Art Buddies. Welcome, Greta.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So glad that you're here. We also have our immediate past president of PRSA, Dr. Betsy Anderson, and she is an associate professor of the Communication Studies Department at Bethel University, where she began her academic journey as a media communications major. Prior to academia, she's worked in agency public relations, and Betsy's also taught at the University of Minnesota and the University of St. Thomas. In addition to her Bachelor of Arts from Bethel University, Betsy holds a PhD in Mass Communications and Master of Arts in Journalism and Mass Communications from the University of Minnesota. She enjoys downhill skiing and spending time at her cabin with her family. Welcome, Betsy.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely. And Emily Tackaberry. She is president-elect of PRSA Minnesota. She is the director of global corporate communications at Boston Scientific. Emily has more than 15 years of communications experience in the healthcare sector, spanning executive communications, change management, crisis communications, public relations, employee engagement, and business continuity. She is also director at large for the Girl Scouts River Valley. And welcome, Emily.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm going to start off the questions with Greta, and I'm going to ask you about your initial vision. When you began your career, did you imagine yourself in a leadership role in this profession? Or did it evolve organically or even unexpectedly?
Well, it was actually quite organic, I would say. It was really based on leadership that I had taken advantage of in high school and in college. And so when I got into the career space, while I saw supervisors that maybe only a few years older than me seemed far, far away in terms of what they knew, it really, provided me an opportunity to learn from them and realize that that's something that I could do too. I got involved in PRSA fairly early on in my career, in college, and then transitioned into my career. And then I took a break and came back. And that's really where I've gotten much more involved from a leadership capacity in this organization. It just felt like the right time to step up into the opportunities, take the lessons that I had learned throughout my career, and really apply them to the organization. So it just has, like I said, been a very organic and a natural process for me.
Well, Emily, I'm going to ask you if you had ever a specific experience or a person that inspired you to take your leadership path.
Yeah, so I'm a proud lifelong Girl Scout, and I remember going to a brownies meeting. My mom was our troop leader, and I would kind of run amok and like be loud and tell people what to do. And oftentimes I'd get in the car with my mom after the meeting, and she would be like, "Why do you have to be like that?" And to me, that was the start of sort of being a leader and using my voice and asking people to, serve and do other great things. And Girl Scouts has taught me a lot about leadership and how to treat people, how to serve others. So I would say that was my defining moment in leadership at a very young age.
Early on, and I'm glad that you were speaking out and using that voice. And Betsy, the why. Why? What motivated you to step up and take on responsibilities of leading an organization rather than maybe, holding back and doing a really tactical role?
Well, I think one of the reasons is my long history with Minnesota PRSA and how much I care about the organization. I joined PRSA during my very first year of my career. Someone called me to ask me to join a committee. And since then, I've served in a number of committee, co-chair, and board roles with PRSA. And then recently, 2 or 3 years ago, I was at a PRSA event, and someone else asked if I'd consider joining the PRSA executive board on the leadership track. So those two things show the importance of identifying future leaders and asking. Sometimes just if you're asked, you'll say, sure, I guess I can do that. And then some of the things that motivated me to say yes were my deep connections with the PRSA community and how much I care about the impact our organization has on people's professional development and careers. I work at Bethel University, and so I thought that could help raise the visibility of our communication program and get our students more involved. I really have a heart generally for students, so helping students of all universities transition from their own PRSSA student clubs to becoming full-fledged professional members is something that I cared about and was one of my priorities as president. And there is something called the Past Presidents Club. So once you've been a Minnesota PRSA president, you get to regularly interact with a phenomenal group of leaders that I feel like I can still learn from. And so I wanted to be part of the Past Presidents Club.
Well, tell me a little bit more about the PRSSA. Is that the student?
Yes, Public Relations Student Society of America. So we have strong chapters at University of Minnesota, St. Thomas, Bethel, and some of our outstate schools, Augustana. We have some South Dakota, North Dakota members as well, and Western Wisconsin. So they bring in speakers, they come to some of our events, and they get their feet wet that way.
And with that, in looking up to folks, when you were in the PRSSA, I'm wondering if there was anyone there that you saw as a leader that you wanted to emulate, or a trailblazing woman that you have known about that helped you go, in addition to being part of the President's Club, I would like to be like this person. This person meant something to me.
Absolutely. So the person who suggested that I join PRSA during my first year of my career was my general manager at the public relations firm Fleischman Hillard. Her name is Ann Barkaloo, and she was a past president of Minnesota PRSA. She got her accreditation in public relations, APR. So I also thought right then you had to have at least 5 years experience. And I said, I want to do that someday. When I have 5 years experience, I want my APR like Ann has. And she's earned many other honors. She just turned 91 this month.
Oh, my.
And she's mentioned in public relations textbooks, which is fun as a professor to see her name in the textbooks I'm teaching from. The Encyclopedia of Public Relations calls her one of the best public relations professionals in the field. And she just on Facebook last summer said, I'm a chapter in a book. So there's a book called Junctures in Women's Leadership, Media and Journalism. And Ann Barkaloo has her own chapter. One of her roles in the field was being a PR leader at Dayton Hudson Corporation, which owned Target at the time. And in the book, it says, in the 1980s, only a handful of public relations women were chief communication officers in Fortune 500 corporations. And one of these women was Anne Barkalow. So I don't know if I realized what greatness I was working with for the first 5 years of my career at the time, but her approach was relationships, empowering her employees to go out and do great work, and really building her team. I remember she joined the Minneapolis Club in her career to network with all these men that she was working with. She sent me out as a 22-year-old to go help a corporation close a plant with a lot of support. And she would always talk in new business meetings about how she handpicked us as the team she would have wanted at Dayton Hudson for her agency. So she always made us feel really cared about. So those are things I've learned from Anne, particularly relationships and team inspire how I approach communication in my career.
And taking on a leadership role can have a lot of different challenges. Some of the challenges that I think women face is that they can be judged for both being assertive, which is important, but also they need to be likable. And it can turn into a double bind. And Greta, I'd love to have what you may have experienced and how that impacted your leadership style and how you bring both to the work that you do.
Yeah, this double bind really hits home to me, from a personality standpoint, because I really thrive on community and collaboration, and that often makes it possible for me to like people and to be liked by people. And so what I have struggled with, historically has been more of that assertion, because it was really categorized to me as more of a negative, until I realized by watching other female leaders in the industry, and then clients that I've had, and just people out in the world who have been able to bridge that. They can still be likable, but they can really make sure that they're making progress. And that's, I think, what assertion really helps do, is to make that progress. So I feel like what I've experienced and what I'm seeing even today from the time I started my career to now, that as more and more women are entering into leadership roles, it does feel like that double bind situation is dissolving, which I think is a great thing. And I think there is more acceptance overall about assertion and trying to continue to make sure that we're progressing things forward. So I feel like it's been great for me, because I've been evolving, and I think the world has been evolving as well.
Absolutely. I remember when I first got into leadership roles, there was a challenge of what was assertive and what was aggressive, and how to know the difference, and was there a difference? And was there a difference if a man was assertive, was that considered assertive? But if I was doing it, was that considered aggressive? So I think getting comfortable in our own skin and just who we are, I think makes it easier for us not to worry so much of, is this assertive or is this aggressive? This is something that we need to do. And how do you rally the troops? And how do you bring people together? Greta, thank you for sharing your insights. I'd like to move to Emily. That is along the same lines about developing our voice. That's something that's always fascinated me on radio, is our voice is who we are. How do we develop that opinion, that idea, that differentiates us from others? And in the last anywhere from 10 to 50 years, the voice of women has changed. And it's changed because our leadership has changed. Tell me more about how you've seen that in the communications field.
Yeah, well, I've come a long way in terms of using my voice. So instead of being the loudest one in the room, I've learned how to, maybe turn that down a little bit and approach things a little bit, quieter or in a different manner. I've had some really great women leaders in my life, and they're not always the loudest. They're not always the quietest. Sometimes it's humor that gets them where they are, or keeps them where they are. And so I think the voice of women has evolved greatly over the last several years. I think we're being invited to the boardrooms, the tables, wherever the meetings are happening. I actually contemplated wearing my Ruth Bader Ginsburg t-shirt today that said women should be in all the rooms where decisions are being made. But I do think there's become more value in having women voices in the room. And I will also say that as a mother of young children, what I've learned around parenting strategies and how I approach, difficult conversations, negotiations, I have been able to interpret that as a parent and into my professional career in terms of how to work with people, humans, and how to use my voice in a different or similar way as I speak to my children. And I have the pleasure of working with people like Greta and Betsy who have very different voices from mine, and so I take little bits of all the voices that I get to be exposed to and try to intertwine that into my leadership.
And I am going to do a roundabout with each of you about your leadership style. And I'd love to have you share with me what you see as your leadership style that you have developed that you feel most comfortable in leading a group, leading a project, leading your team. And I'll start with Greta.
Yeah, I think that I tend to try to lead by example, because I feel like if the leader isn't willing to do what it takes to, accomplish the goal, it's hard to motivate others. So my style is really to make sure that I'm, always stepping up and stepping in as much as I can, and as much as that makes sense when I'm in that situation. So that's, and I think the other big piece for me is really leading with empathy and understanding that everybody is in a different situation, and regardless of what we are trying to do, and people are going to be coming at it from different perspectives, and to know that there's not necessarily one way to get something done, but there's many ways to do it. And I think by working together and collaboratively, we can get there.
Betsy, tell me.
I would say I'm definitely not a hierarchical person, more of a flat organization, a team where I'm just as willing to jump in and do the work as my team, and very open to their ideas, and collaborating rather than dictating.
And Emily.
Yeah, I consider myself a servant leader. I'm here to really kind of serve my community, serve others. That's why I volunteer with Minnesota PRSA and a number of other organizations. I would say my style is very much lead, teach, and then let them grow. So lead by example, I think in the same vein as Greta, but make sure they understand the task, how to, achieve what they need to achieve, but also go forth and conquer. Call me if you need help.
And with that, we'll go forth with this segment. If you want more information on the Minnesota Public Relations Society, I encourage you to go to MinnesotaPRSA.org. And thank you for joining us on Connections Radio Show here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. We'll be right back, and we'll hear about some of the challenges in leadership as well. And we'll be hearing from our President Rowe from the Minnesota PRSA. And welcome to Connections Radio, where we talk about ideas that matter, and I am glad you have made the connection. March has been Women's History Month with the theme of Leading the Change, and today I have 3 women leaders joining me to discuss their leadership journey and the ways they each have been ensuring knowledge and leadership skills are passed to the next wave of change makers. And we have what I call my President's Row, the past president, the current president, and president-elect of the Minnesota Public Relations Society of America, PRSA. These are women who have shaped narratives and guide us in times of challenges, and I've asked them to share about what they have learned as women leaders. And today we have Greta Lovrens. She is the current president of PRSA Minnesota, and she does integrated communications and public relations for her, and is the agency leader at Carmichael Lynch Relate. We have Dr. Betsy Anderson, immediate past president of PRSA Minnesota, and she is associate professor of communication studies at Bethel University. And we have Emily Tackaberry, who is president-elect of PRSA, and she is a director of global corporate communications at Boston Scientific. So, Greta, I'm going to have you jump right in with the age-old imposter syndrome. Have you ever experienced that? And what strategies have you used, or how have you dealt with it? If you could tell a story about a challenge that you've had with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I first learned about the term imposter syndrome from a colleague. It wasn't defined when I originally felt it, but she did a presentation for agency about what it is and how to identify it and also ways to combat it. And boy, was that ever eye-opening. I was like, everybody feels this. This isn't just me at the times when I've been, the youngest in the room or surrounded by really strong colleagues. It's very easy to feel intimidated and to feel like you don't necessarily belong or you aren't quite ready to be speaking. And I think that the struggle is real. Yeah. And I guess I go back to one amazing way that PRSA has helped many of us in this group, in the President's Row, conquer imposter syndrome is probably through the APR, which Betsy mentioned a little bit earlier. It's the accreditation process that we have as part of our association. And the idea is that once you have at least 5 years of experience, a lot of people wait a lot longer than 5 years because 5 years, you learn a lot in 5 years, but you learn a lot in 10, you learn more in 10 and more and beyond that. But really, it's an opportunity to really prove that you are familiar with the practice and all of the aspects and elements of strategic public relations. It can give you confidence. Part of the process is that you're presenting a project and you're interviewing with a panel and defending that project, that experience. And then you're taking a test. It's a multiple choice test. It takes like 3 hours and it feels very daunting, but it's really about the different scenarios that you face as part of your career and as part of public relations. And kind of getting through that is a huge boost to making you feel confident and giving you that additional credibility that allows you to, really conquer some of that imposter syndrome. So I do feel like that is one way that many public relations professionals do that. It's not the only way. There's other, further education. There's other professional development. There's just, closely working with mentors. All of those things I think I've taken advantage of to really help give myself that understanding that I do know what I'm talking about, and I can do it, and I can build my own confidence.
And with that confidence, I'm going to go to Betsy. Betsy, there are times when, similar to being assertive and also being likable, there's the nice versus tough. And I think once we start gaining our confidence, it's how to navigate that nice and tough challenge. And especially in our communications, where a lot of it depends on soft skills. How do you navigate the tension between those, both being empathetic as well as assertive?
So I think I naturally gravitate towards the nice and the empathy side of things. But also, it's not hard for me to be assertive in terms of sharing my thoughts and opinions. And perhaps that's a little bit more, I tend to be very engaged. And sometimes in faculty meetings, I have to limit myself to one comment per meeting so I don't dominate. But there's other ways that I am not very naturally assertive. And one thing I regularly have to stretch myself on in terms of being assertive is delivering feedback to students. So for those of you that don't have students out in the audience, it might be to your mentees or your newer team members. And sometimes you have hard things that they may not want to hear, like your writing isn't up to par, or you do need to come to class, or this is going to, or turn things in, or this is going to affect your future career. And you want to maintain that relationship with them, and you don't want a negative, peer or student evaluation. So I've really had to stretch myself to be assertive and not just get to say all the positive things, but give them some good feedback. So I have a story. When I had my very first supervisee, the person was kind of inconsistent. Sometimes what they turned in was amazing and sometimes it just wasn't. And I had a hard time figuring that out, but, had to kind of say that. And later, after I went back to grad school, I heard through the grapevine that person said, I kind of miss Betsy as my supervisor. She would really push me, which shocked me. I thought maybe he really didn't like that. But I think my approach is to build a good relationship with my students. And then when I'm delivering some, helpful advice, let them know I really care about their future. And that's where the feedback is coming from. And then really listening to and watching, hey, that went okay. I can keep doing this. So,
and my guess is she felt seen. She knew, I'm sure herself, that she was not doing as well as she could.
Yeah. It could have been I think it was a busyness, sometimes busy, sometimes not, but just knowing that it was important and that, yes, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Emily, addressing gender bias, has there been any significant gender-related roadblock that you've had?
Yeah, I actually grew up in an auto repair shop. My dad was an owner-operator of a mechanical auto repair shop, and I was very used to working in a male-dominated industry. Now, mind you, it was a after-school kind of job, but I very quickly had to learn how to let some things roll off my back like a duck, as my dad would say. And I think I eventually had to find the balance between let that go versus, no, I'm going to say something about this. I'm not going to stand for that. A recent example, I was on a plane while the women's hockey USA team won gold. And everybody was celebrating, and some guy said, oh, it was just the women. And I was not going to let that fly. So I turned around and I said, you mean it was the women? So I do think, Minnesota PRSA has done an incredible job of continuing to have really critical conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that includes, gender biases, cultural biases. So I'm so grateful to be included in some of those learning opportunities and those crucial conversations around how do we continue to make sure we're showing up to, right the wrongs, create equitable opportunities for people with different backgrounds, different beliefs, different skin colors. So I am just so honored to be included in such a huge force within the state of Minnesota. And obviously we still have some work to do, but I will leave you with this one thought. I was going after a pretty big promotion a number of years ago, and was going into a meeting where we were going to, start to negotiate my title and my salary. And I had called my mom for a pep talk, and she said, Emily, just because you're a woman does not mean you deserve any less than any male in that role. And so I went in, head held high, put a number on a piece of paper, slid it across the table, and you know what? I got what I wanted. So the worst they're going to say is no. So just go after it.
Well, bravo to you for using your voice both on the airplane and in negotiations.
Right.
I love it. All right, Greta, I'm going to come to you with impact versus details. I don't know about you, but sometimes details are really nice to just check off the box. But moving into impact and looking at high-level impact with strategic items is important. Tell me about how you balance that out.
Yeah, well, I do love the details. I think it's part of my DNA. I'm a Virgo, and so when you look at the different astrological signs and you hear about what different kind of traits, personality traits you have when you talk about Virgos, they're usually practical, grounded, they're detail-oriented. I recently just looked up, what sort of famous characters are Virgos, and this was kind of fun. Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter series is a Virgo. Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games is also a Virgo. And then if you want to be really recent, from Zootopia, Judy Hopps is also a Virgo. So take that back to your friends and family of all ages. But to solve problems, it's more than just the details. You have to look at the full situation to have that high level impact. And so what I have found is by looking at the data and kind of stepping back and looking at that big picture, it really helps with that sort of transition from just little details, checking those boxes, into that bigger picture, and really bringing that high level impact, especially when we're talking about something that's a major strategic item for your organization, or it's a volunteer opportunity, et cetera. At Minnesota PRSA, we just reviewed and updated our strategic plan for the next couple of years, and a lot of that was thinking about the high level impact that we want to have as an organization in the communications community here locally, but also even nationally, since we're part of a national organization. And so I think thinking about that impact is so important, and that gets us excited about the little details that we need to check off, but also about the bigger picture.
Well, I know that communications also needs to handle crisis and how to balance the resilience that you need to have through those crisis times. Emily, can you describe sometime when you've had a communications crisis and you've had to lead through that, and how did your role change?
Yeah, so I think we can all, as communicators, remember where we were when COVID-19 kind of shut down the world. And at the time, I worked for a specialty pharmacy, so we shipped really important medicine that patients needed to sustain their life. And so we had a number of people who needed to continue to go into the office. So it was critical for us to continue communicating who was going where, how they were getting there. We even had to draft a letter that people carried in their glove box in case they got stopped by authorities on their way into work. What I learned, though, was that my team especially needed a really resilient, strong leader, somebody who charted the path for them to say, here's where we're going, here's how we're getting there. I had put together like a spreadsheet that we went through on a daily basis to say, okay, who's working on what, who's got what. But most importantly, we did these twice daily check-ins, I think, for the first few weeks after the world sort of shut down. And my primary concern was like, how are you guys doing? How is your family? And I feel like that really sort of set this tone for my team that, like, I care about you as a person first, and then I care about the work and how we're showing up for this company. That was emulated by our leadership team 100%. And so it was very easy for me to kind of pass that down. But I would say we came out of that situation a very high performing team. And our company eventually got acquired by a much larger company. And so we all sort of parted ways at one point, but we often, stay in touch and text each other saying like, oh, I just miss our team so much. But, while you're in the thick of a crisis, it's not always fun, but looking back on it, we really kind of did a lot of good, hard work. And we came out stronger because of it.
And some of that you just had to do on the fly. And you
That's
had to
right.
just trust your gut and go with it. I'm seeing you two nod. I'd love to have your opinion too, Greta and Betsy. We'll start with Betsy on going through tough times like that.
I was at the University of Minnesota at the time and had a great leader at the Hubbard School of Journalism, Alicia Cohen. And one thing I thought she did really well in terms of crisis communication is she was getting so many emails and so many questions that she created a document with all the questions, and she'd update it by 4:00 every day. And then we'd have her check in. So anyone that had questions could put them on the document. She would get the answers, and then we'd have that daily meeting to check in. And I think that we were talking earlier about being nice and empathetic, and maybe it's more acceptable now for women to be assertive. But I also think that time made it more acceptable for us to be empathetic. And I remember hearing my husband's Teams or Zoom meetings floating up the stairway, and they're kind of a company of drivers and probably more males than females, although, 60-40. And they would say, how's everyone doing? And I think that was a good thing that hopefully has carried through since then.
And Greta.
Yeah, I was just taking a little pivot on this. I was recently speaking at a class at the University of St. Thomas, and we were talking about when things go wrong, which is kind of the impetus of a crisis. And it couldn't be something that's big or something that isn't as big. And I think you have to be comfortable in leadership that something is going to go wrong at some point. Nothing is completely smooth sailing, as much as we'd all like it to be. And so the preparedness aspect of, crisis and issues management, but also even if it's not, even that, just having sort of those extra scenarios in play. Again, it brings confidence as a leader because undoubtedly something will happen at some point and you'll just feel more prepared. It, gets after that imposter syndrome. It's all of those things that are kind of wrapped up into, how to continue to grow as a leader. So certainly I have lots of pandemic stories too of leading teams and all of that. But I think it's just, we never had a pandemic crisis plan. At least, I didn't have one in the books, but certainly you look at other plans that are there and you can build upon those to continue to grow.
Well, you all are seasoned leaders now. And as you look back to when you were starting your journey, I'd love to hear from each of you. I want to start with Betsy. What would have been something that you would have wanted to know or learn either when you were starting off your journey as a leader or when you got your first leadership role? What would have been really helpful for you? And I'm going to start with Betsy.
I would honestly say get more mentors and admit that I didn't know everything. I think I was complimented early on in my agency days of, wow, you're so mature. I wasn't so mature at your age, and being thrown into things like helping with a plant closing or leading a big client meeting at 22 years old. And so I wanted to appear like I had it all together. And the same with grad school, and probably the same with my first teaching job. And I think just not feeling like I had to have it all together and allowing myself to ask more questions and seeking out more mentors would have saved me learning things the hard way sometimes. Yeah.
Emily.
I was recently gifted a book called The Four Agreements, and I actually have the four agreements printed and at my desk right now. And I know that there's also a fifth agreement, but the first is to be impeccable with your word. So say what you mean what you say. The second is to not take anything personally. So I think that goes back to, sometimes people do things and you just got to let that roll off your back. They didn't do it because they were after you. It just kind of happened. The third thing is don't make assumptions. So, don't assume that you know everything or that other people know everything. Like, ask the question. And then finally, always do your best. So I think those have become kind of guideposts for me as a leader. And, I'm glad it came into my life when it did. But had it come into my life maybe early on in my leadership career, I'm just curious how it would have shaped it. But that's kind of what I live by now.
I love it. And Greta.
Yeah, I think in one scenario, I feel like I really wish I would have understood more about what how I would be measured as a leader. Because I think you can easily get into assuming certain things or looking at others that have been in certain roles, but to have a grasp of, what is the real measurement and have alignment on that with your boss or the organization that you're trying to lead is really critical, because I think it can then help you reflect and really look at, what you are trying to do and help you move towards that goal. So really understanding what the purpose is or how you're being measured as a leader, it can really help a lot. And it isn't always possible, but when there is a situation that you can get there, I think it's extremely valuable and helps set you up for success.
And when you can have good discussions with your PRSA Minnesota colleagues is also very helpul. And I want to let the audience know that if you want more information on the Minnesota Public Relations Society of America, you can go to minnesotaprsa.org. And thank you for joining us on Connections Radio Show here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. And Stay with us. Join us for another segment. We're going to be hearing about some events and some other wonderful things that PRSA does with mentoring and bringing up the next generation. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. I'm Lori Fitz, your host. And we have been having a wonderful conversation about Women's History Month in the theme of leading the change. I've had 3 wonderful women leaders joining me to discuss their leadership journey and ways that each of them are ensuring knowledge and leadership skills are passed on to the next wave of change makers. And we have what I call President's Row, the past president, current president, and president-elect of the Minnesota Public Relations Society of America, PRSA. We have Greta Lavrenz. She is the current president of PRSA, and she is an integrated communications and public relations agency leader, and she is with Carmichael Lynch Relate. Dr. Betsy Anderson, she is the immediate past president of PRSA, and she is an associate professor of communication studies at Bethel University. And we have Emily Tackaberry. She is president-elect of PRSA, and she is a director of global corporate communications at Boston Scientific. Welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for sharing this hour. So in this segment, we're going to talk a little bit more about mentoring, especially mentoring the next generation. And I want to start with Emily on the why. Why is it important for leaders, especially, to make the commitment to mentor?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some amazing mentors throughout my career, anywhere from folks who I can be very open and honest and transparent with to somebody who might just be a listening ear. And I feel strongly about paying it forward. And so I think there's a point in your career where you're sort of always looking for, like, who can help me, who can guide me. And then there becomes this shift. And sometimes it's like you don't even realize it's happening, but all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute, I've got more experience. I feel like I can share that with somebody, or I can offer a listening ear to somebody who might just not know how to navigate something. And I think, oftentimes that happens and we don't really realize it, but I would really encourage, folks who have been in a leadership position to really kind of offer mentorship to people in their lives, people in their professional circle. It could be somebody in your industry. It could be somebody totally outside of your industry. But I do think as leaders, it's up to us to help the next generation of leaders really see a glimpse into what it takes to lead others. And I feel very strongly about paying it forward. And so, if anybody ever needs help, please reach out. But again, I'll say it again. I think I said it in the last segment, but the worst somebody's going to say no. So always ask for what you need. And the worst somebody's going to say is no.
I love that aha moment that you go from being a mentee to realizing, hey, wait a minute, I think I can be a mentor now. Mm-hmm. And at that point, being able to offer, because again, mentees may not know what the advantages are of being mentored. And when you've had that experience of being a mentor, then offering it back out, I think gives it depth. Mm-hmm. So, Betsy, I want to talk about strategic matching. I know that there are programs, PRSA's Mentor Connect and the Minnesota PRSA's membership matches. You've seen lots of different kinds of pairings. What do you think is the most important soft skill that you should bring to the table in a relationship when you are going to be partnering in this mentorship? So it's not just a transaction, it's a meaningful opportunity.
Yes, correct. That is one piece of feedback that we've gotten is occasionally a mentor will be paired with a mentee who is mostly interested in, here's my resume, how do I make it better? How do I get a job? Do you have a job for me? And so I think listening, curiosity, and wanting to build that two-way relationship are important things for the mentee to recognize going into the mentorship relationship. So I think even teaching them how to keep in touch. So you have a couple formal things set up. get to know them. And it's okay to say, hey, I saw this article. I thought you might be interested, or hey, I had a question. So really working on building that two-way relationship, and that it is two ways that you'll learn from each other. I think a lot of times mentors get a lot out of it because they want to learn from the younger generation as well. And going back to what Emily was talking about of the why behind mentoring, I hadn't thought of it until Emily was talking, but it made me think. I've had so many people close the door when I decided to leave my my real life career and go into academia, and they're like, I kind of think teaching would be interesting. I'd love to mentor and work with young students. So I think mentors get a lot of reward out of it as well. Kind of like when you volunteer, sometimes you get more back than you give, but also, yeah, making sure that you're not taking everything as a mentee, but that you're building that two-way relationship. So you're giving and taking, and building a lifelong friendship.
And diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important, especially in mentoring. And I want to go to Greta with the whole idea that I know that PRSA Foundation creates pathways for underrepresented talent, and you've been a trailblazing chapter in supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion at the local level. How have you intentionally used that mentorship to ensure women aren't just being in the room, but they're staying there, and they're staying there in leadership roles?
Well, thank you for teeing up that question so well, and acknowledging how Minnesota PRSA has really demonstrated leadership here. I think it's something that the three of us are really proud of. When we go to the international conference and we talk to other chapters, we find out that, we're doing a lot here in Minnesota, and I think it really makes all of us proud. And just to brag a little bit more about what we've done, we were really an early chapter when it came to creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer that's part of our executive board. And that role is really to make sure that this is continuing. This effort is not just a one and done, but it's something that, we are doing as a chapter, and everything that we're doing from our programming to our board leadership and everything in between. And in 2020, our chapter was the inaugural donor for the PRSA National Multicultural Endowed Scholarship. And that was really to help support diverse public relations talent, get education and get support. So, we, I think, are really living and breathing that here. And because of that, we're not pulling back like other organizations are, and our strategic plan reflects that this is a priority that we want to continue, because we know that to ensure that diverse women are feeling, are not just entering the room, but, staying in the room, they have to feel comfortable, and we have to create that welcoming environment. So I think it's something that, we are taking very seriously and looking at every aspect of our organization to make sure that we're fulfilling that. And then just to non-PRSA, but a couple of the other volunteer aspects that you talked about early on in my background, Take Flight is a program that is really about, again, helping welcome diverse communicators into the profession. So identifying students that might need a little extra boost, and bringing them to understand what it might be like to work in an agency or another communications role. And even Art Buddies, which is a program that is designed to help really spur creativity. It typically is centered upon students in schools that are, underrepresented in terms of income and all sorts of different resources. So, I'm really proud of those things, because I think that the more people see folks like themselves in the room, the more they're willing to stay.
And with that, we have less than a minute to talk about a couple things coming up. Emily, I know that you're doing a career coffee on Tuesday, April 7th, and that's at 8 in the morning till 9:30 in the morning. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Career Coffee is a chance for people to come and have open and honest conversations about their career. This one is focused on job searching and the process of getting hired, going through interviews, all the things that go into getting a job. So
and
we've got
And to go there and to sign up, you can go to minnesotaprsa.org. We also have a Midwest PRSA conference coming up. Terrific conference that I encourage folks to think about going to. Can you give us the website for that, Greta?
Yeah, it's prsamdc.org, and it's June 24th to 26th, so we hope to see you there.
Terrific. And thank you for listening to AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota on Connections Radio Show.